Picture this. A millionaire walks into an upscale wedding with a homeless woman on his arm. The guests stare in shock. The bride's face goes pale. And what happens next will leave you speechless. This isn't just another story about money and revenge. It's about Daniel Martinez, a man who clawed his way out of poverty only to discover that success couldn't heal the deepest wounds of betrayal. Daniel wasn't born into wealth. Far from it. He grew up in a cramped apartment where the electricity got cut off more often than it stayed on. His mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and Daniel learned early that if he wanted something in life, he'd have to fight for it every single day. By 25, he was sleeping on a friend's couch, selling insurance door to door, getting rejected 90% of the time. But Daniel had something most people don't. He had hunger, not just for food, though he'd known that kind of hunger too. Hunger for more, for better, for a life that meant something. It took him 15 years of 18-hour days, failed ventures, and countless sleepless nights. But Daniel built an empire, real estate, tech investments, a portfolio that most people could only dream of. He had the penthouse, the cars, the respect, everything he'd ever wanted, except for the one thing that mattered most. Clara, she'd been with him through the worst of it, when he was pitching investors in a borrowed suit, when they were sharing ramen noodles for dinner. His first startup crashed and burned, taking his savings with it. Clara was there, telling him she believed in him, that they'd make it together. And they almost did. Daniel proposed on the night his company went public. A modest ring, because even with his newfound success, he was careful with money. Clara said yes with tears in her eyes, and for a moment, Daniel thought he had everything. Then came the lawsuit. A former partner claimed Daniel had stolen proprietary technology. It was baseless, but it was expensive to fight. Daniel's stock plummeted. His investors got nervous. For 6 months, his entire fortune hung in the balance. That's when Clara showed her true colors. She didn't leave quietly. She didn't sit him down for an honest conversation about her fears or doubts. No, Clara waited until Daniel was at his lowest point, when the legal bills were mounting and the stress was eating him alive, to tell him she'd been seeing someone else. James Wellington. Old money. The kind of wealth that never fluctuates with market conditions or legal troubles. The betrayal cut deeper than any business failure ever could. Daniel had survived poverty, rejection, and professional sabotage, but Clara's abandonment nearly destroyed him. She took the ring off her finger like it was contaminated and walked out of his life without looking back. Within 3 months, she was engaged to James. Daniel fought the lawsuit and won. His reputation was restored, his wealth returned, and then some, but the victory fell hollow. He'd gained everything back except the one person he'd actually wanted to share it with. 2 years passed. Daniel threw himself into work, into new deals, into anything that could fill the void Clara had left behind. He dated occasionally, but every relationship felt like a pale shadow of what he'd lost, or what he thought he'd lost. Then the invitation arrived. Cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing. Expensive, tasteful, classic Clara. Mr. and Mrs. Wellington request the honor of your presence at the wedding of their daughter Clara Wellington and Mr. James Wellington III. Daniel stared at that invitation for a full 5 minutes. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After everything she'd done, after abandoning him when he needed her most, Clara had the nerve to invite him to watch her marry the man she'd cheated with. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a power play. A final humiliation. Clara wanted him there to see her triumph. To watch her walk down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. To witness her living the fairy tale life she decided she couldn't have with him. Most people would have thrown the invitation away, or burned it, or used it as motivation to forget and move on. But Daniel wasn't most people. He'd spent his entire life turning other people's expectations on their head. He'd gone from food stamps to Forbes lists, from rejection to respect. And he wasn't about to let Clara Wellington have the last word. The wheels in Daniel's mind were already turning, crafting a plan that would make Clara's wedding day unforgettable, but not for the reason she expected. If you were in Daniel's shoes, would you attend the wedding or ignore the invitation completely? Let me know in the comments, because what Daniel decided to do next would shock everyone in that church, including Clara herself. Before we dive deeper into Daniel's plan, remember these stories take hours of research, writing, and editing to bring to life. If you enjoy them, please hit subscribe so we can keep sharing more with you. Because what Daniel did at that wedding and who he brought with him would change everything. 3 days after receiving Clara's invitation, Daniel found himself walking through downtown at 2 in the morning. He couldn't sleep. The invitation sat on his kitchen counter like a loaded weapon, and every time he looked at it, his blood pressure spiked. He'd been wandering the empty streets for an hour when he heard it, a voice, clear and confident, cutting through the night air. "Excuse me, sir, you're blocking my office." Daniel turned around, confused. He was standing in front of a closed bank, its metal security gates pulled down tight. There was no office here. That's when he saw her, a woman, probably in her early 30s, sitting on a piece of cardboard with her back against a building. Her clothes were worn but clean, her long dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Despite her circumstances, she held herself with a dignity that caught Daniel off guard. "Your office?" he asked. "Prime real estate," she replied with a wry smile. "Climate-controlled ATM lobby during business hours. Decent foot traffic for tips, and the security cameras keep the creeps away. You're standing in my commute path." Daniel stepped aside, but he didn't walk away. Something about this woman intrigued him. Most homeless people he'd encountered avoided eye contact, seemed beaten down by life. This woman looked him straight in the eye like she had every right to be there. "I'm Marissa," she said, settling back against the wall. "And you're either having the worst insomnia of your life, or you're running from something." "How do you know?" "Nobody wanders around downtown in a $1,500 suit at 2 a.m. unless they're trying to escape their own thoughts." She tilted her head. "So which is it? Bad dreams or bad decisions?" Daniel almost smiled despite himself. "Both, actually. I'm Daniel." "Well, Daniel, if you're looking for life advice, my consultation fee is a cup of coffee. If you're looking for something else, keep walking." There was something refreshing about her directness. No pretense, no hidden agenda, just honest human interaction, something Daniel realized he'd been missing for months. "Coffee sounds good," he said, "but nothing's open at this hour. There's a 24-hour diner 6 blocks north. Terrible coffee, but it's hot." Marissa started gathering her few possessions. "Unless you're too good to be seen with someone like me." The comment stung because it was exactly what most people in his circle would think. But Daniel had grown up on the wrong side of town. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to have people look through you like you didn't matter. 20 minutes later, they were sitting across from each other in a fluorescent-lit diner that smelled like grease and broken dreams. Marissa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like it was precious metal. "So what's eating you, Daniel?" she asked. Something about the quiet diner, the late hour, and Marissa's straightforward manner made Daniel want to talk. He found himself telling her about Clara, about the betrayal, about the wedding invitation that felt like a slap in the face. Marissa listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that cut right to the heart of the matter. "Sounds like she did you a favor," she said finally. "Better find out someone shallow before you marry them than after. Easy to say when you're not the one who got dumped." "Who says I haven't been?" Marissa's eyes flashed. "You think you're the only one who's had their heart ripped out and stomped on?" Daniel studied her face. There was pain there, carefully hidden but unmistakable to someone who'd carried his own wounds for 2 years. "What happened?" he asked softly. Marissa was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. "I used to be a teacher. 3rd grade. Had a house, a car, a fiancé who was going to medical school. I thought we were building a life together." She took a shaky breath. "Then I got sick. Lupus. The medical bills piled up faster than we could pay them. I lost the job because I was missing too much work. Lost the house because we couldn't make the mortgage. And my fiancé..." She laughed bitterly. He decided he didn't want to be tied down to someone with a chronic illness. Said he had his whole career ahead of him. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Like I said, better to know who someone really is before you marry them." Marissa met his eyes again. "The difference between you and me is that you bounce back. You rebuilt. I'm still trying to figure out how to do that." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two wounded people recognizing something familiar in each other. Then Daniel had an idea. It was crazy, impulsive, and probably stupid, but it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in months. "Come with me to the wedding," he said. Marissa nearly choked on her coffee. "What?" "Clara wants to humiliate me by showing off her perfect new life. What if I showed up with someone unexpected? Someone real? You want to bring a homeless woman to your ex's wedding as some kind of revenge plot?" Marissa's voice was sharp. "That's sick, Daniel. I'm not a prop for your drama." No, that's not what I meant." Daniel leaned forward, trying to find the right words. "Look, I know how this sounds, but hear me out. You're intelligent, articulate, and you got more class in your little finger than most of the people who'll be at that wedding. Clara and her crowd. They judge people by their bank accounts and their zip codes. They see surface, not substance. And you think parading me around like some kind of social experiment is going to prove a point? I think showing up with someone genuine, someone who survived real adversity with grace, would remind everyone what actually matters. Daniel paused, including me. Marissa stared at him for a long moment. You're crazy. Probably. But I'm also serious. I'll take care of everything. New clothes, hair, makeup, whatever you need. And in return, you get a free meal, a chance to see how the other half lives, and the satisfaction of knowing you helped take someone down a peg who probably deserves it. Why should I trust you? I don't know you from anyone. Daniel considered the question. Because I could have walked past your office tonight and pretended I didn't see you, like most people do. Instead, I'm sitting in a crappy diner at 3 a.m, drinking terrible coffee and asking you to help me crash a wedding. If I wanted to hurt you, I'd have better ways to do it. Marissa was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she was going to say no. Finally, she spoke. If I do this, I'm not your charity case. I'm not your social statement. I'm your equal. Can you handle that? I wouldn't want it any other way. And if your ex or her friends try to humiliate me, you have my back? Completely. Marissa extended her hand across the table. Okay, Daniel, let's crash a wedding. As they shook hands, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just excitement about getting back at Clara, but genuine connection with another human being. Someone who understood loss and betrayal, but hadn't let it break her spirit. Do you think Marissa should have trusted Daniel so quickly, or would you have walked away? Because what happened next would transform both of their lives in ways neither of them saw coming. The wedding was being held at the Rosewood Country Club, the kind of place where memberships cost more than most people's houses, and the parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership. Daniel pulled up in his Bentley, and he could see Marissa's eyes widen slightly as she took in the opulent surroundings. Second thoughts, he asked. Are you kidding? Marissa straightened her shoulders. I've been looking forward to this all week. The moment they walked through the doors, conversation stopped. Every head in the room turned. Daniel felt a surge of satisfaction as he watched the guests' faces cycle through confusion, shock, and barely concealed judgment. But beside him, Marissa seemed completely unfazed by the attention. She walked with the confidence of someone who belonged there, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's arm, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Then Daniel saw Clara. She was standing near the altar in her wedding dress, a vision in white silk and pearls that probably cost more than most people's cars. But her face had gone pale, and her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the shock in her eyes. Is that her? Marissa whispered. That's her. She's beautiful, Marissa said without a trace of jealousy. And she looks absolutely terrified. I think your plan is working. As they made their way through the crowd, Daniel watched people's reactions change. The initial shock gave way to curiosity as guests tried to figure out who this stunning woman was and why she was with Daniel Martinez. Mrs. Henderson, the country club's biggest gossip, was the first to approach. Daniel, darling, how wonderful to see you, she gushed, her eyes fixed on Marissa. And who is this lovely creature? Mrs. Henderson, I'd like you to meet Marissa Chun, Daniel said smoothly. Marissa, this is Mrs. Henderson. She's on the board of the Children's Hospital. How wonderful, Marissa said, extending her hand gracefully. I used to teach 3rd grade. There's nothing more important than caring for children. Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. You're an educator? How refreshing. Most of the young women Daniel usually brings to these events seem more interested in shopping than shaping young minds. Daniel bristled slightly at the backhanded comment, but Marissa just smiled. Well, everyone has different talents, she said diplomatically. I'm sure they contribute in their own ways. Indeed, Mrs. Henderson said, clearly impressed by Marissa's grace. What school did you teach at? For the briefest moment, Marissa's smile faltered. Daniel could see her calculating how to answer, without lying, but also without revealing too much. I taught in the public school system, she said finally. Unfortunately, I had to take a leave of absence due to some health issues. I'm hoping to return to the classroom soon. It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Daniel felt a surge of admiration for how smoothly she'd handled the question. Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically. Well, dear, the education system needs more dedicated teachers like you. Daniel, you found yourself a gem. As Mrs. Henderson moved away, more people began approaching their table. Word was spreading that Daniel's mystery date was not only beautiful, but intelligent and charming. The ceremony itself was a blur of expensive flowers, classical music, and vows that sounded more like business contracts than promises of love. Daniel found himself watching Marissa more than the bride and groom. She seemed genuinely moved by the proceedings, dabbing at her eyes during the vows despite knowing this was all part of a revenge scheme. "You okay?" he whispered. "I still believe in love," she whispered back, "even when it's not real." The comment hit Daniel harder than he expected. When was the last time he believed in anything that deeply? During the cocktail hour, Marissa continued to charm everyone she met. She talked literature with a retired professor, discussed cooking techniques with a chef, and even managed to make the stuffy bank president laugh with a story about one of her former students. But Daniel could see Clara watching from across the room, her expression growing darker by the minute. She'd barely spoken to her new husband, too focused on the social dynamics playing out around Daniel's table. "She's planning something," Marissa said quietly, following his gaze. "How can you tell?" "I'm a teacher. I know that look. It's the same expression kids get right before they do something they know they shouldn't." Sure enough, during the dinner service, Clara made her move. She stood up at the head table and tapped her champagne glass with a fork, calling for attention. The room quieted as all eyes turned to Bride. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this wonderful day with James and me," Claire began, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Marriage is about truth, about knowing someone completely and loving them anyway." Her eyes found Daniel's table. "It's about being honest about who we are and where we come from." Daniel felt his blood run cold. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But Clara's smile was razor sharp. "In fact, I think it's wonderful when people overcome their circumstances, when they rise above their humble beginnings." The words were carefully chosen, but the implication was clear to anyone paying attention. Several guests glanced toward Daniel and Marissa with newfound curiosity. "Take my dear friend Daniel's lovely companion, for instance," Clara continued, raising her glass toward their table. "I think it's inspiring when someone can reinvent themselves so completely. From the streets to the country club, as they say." The room went dead silent. Daniel started to stand, his face flushing with anger, but Marissa's hand on his arm stopped him. "Let me," she said quietly. She rose gracefully, her head held high, and raised her own glass. "You're absolutely right, Clara," Marissa said, her voice carrying just as clearly as the bride's. "I think it's wonderful when people overcome adversity, when they refuse to let their circumstances define them." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I've learned that true class isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from being kind to them." Marissa's eyes swept the room, meeting the gaze of guest after guest. "It's about lifting others up instead of tearing them down. It's about finding strength in vulnerability and beauty in brokenness." She turned back to Clara with a serene smile. "So thank you for the reminder that our past doesn't determine our worth. Here's to second chances, new beginnings, and the courage to be authentically ourselves." The room erupted in applause. Genuine, enthusiastic applause that went on far longer than was typical for a toast. Clara stood frozen at the head table, her face flushed with humiliation. She'd tried to destroy Marissa, and instead had been completely outclassed in front of everyone she'd wanted to impress. As Marissa sat back down, Daniel stared at her in amazement. "How did you do that?" "Sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon you have," she said simply. But across the room, Clara was whispering urgently to someone on her phone. Her face was twisted with rage, and Daniel could see her gesturing angrily in their direction. "She's not done," Marissa observed. "What do you mean?" "That wasn't just public humiliation. That was personal. She's going to try to destroy me completely now." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He'd started this as a game, a way to get back at his ex. But looking at Marissa's calm, dignified face, he realized this had stopped being about revenge somewhere along the way. This had become about protecting someone who mattered to him. How would you react if your ex tried to humiliate you in front of a crowd? Would you stay calm like Marissa or fight back directly? Because Clara wasn't done yet, and what she was planning would test everyone's limits in ways no one saw coming. Clara's phone call lasted exactly 3 minutes. Daniel watched her from across the reception hall, noting the way her shoulders tensed with each word she spoke. When she finally hung up, her smile was different, sharper, more dangerous. "Whatever she's planning is not good," Marissa said, following his gaze. She was right. Clara was moving through the crowd now, stopping at each table, whispering something to the guests. Daniel could see the change in their faces as she spoke. The polite interest turned to shock, then to something worse. "Pity. Ladies and gentlemen," Clara announced, standing once again at the head table. "I hope everyone is enjoying the evening. Before we continue with the dancing, I wanted to share something with you all." The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the bride, who looked radiant in her wedding dress and absolutely venomous in her expression. "You know, marriage has taught me so much about honesty, about the importance of being truthful with the people we care about." Clara's eyes locked onto Daniel's table, which is why I feel it's important that you all know exactly who we're sharing this special evening with. Daniel's heart began to race. He started to stand, but Marissa's hand found his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet. My dear friend Daniel has brought someone very interesting as his date tonight," Clara continued, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed room. "Someone who has quite an inspiring story of overcoming adversity." She paused for effect, savoring the moment. "You see, Marissa here isn't just between jobs, as she so eloquently put earlier. She's actually homeless, living on the streets, sleeping in doorways and begging for spare change." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face as he watched the guests' expressions change. Some looked shocked, others disgusted. A few seemed confused, as if they couldn't reconcile the elegant woman at Daniel's table with the image Clara was painting. "I think it's wonderful that Daniel wanted to do charity work," Clara said with false sweetness. "Taking someone off the streets for one night, giving them a taste of how the other half lives. It's very generous of him." The implication was clear and cruel. Marissa wasn't Daniel's date. She was his charity case. Daniel was on his feet before he could stop himself, fury coursing through his veins. But Marissa beat him to it. She stood slowly, gracefully, her head held high despite the whispers that had started throughout the room. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "You're absolutely right, Clara. I am homeless." The admission sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Daniel's heart broke as he watched Marissa stand there, exposed and vulnerable, in front of all these people. But she wasn't done. "I lost my home when I got sick and couldn't work anymore. Lost my savings paying medical bills. Lost my fiancé when he decided my illness made me too much of a burden." Marissa's voice remained steady, but Daniel could hear the pain underneath. "I've been living on the streets for 8 months now." Clara's smile widened. She thought she'd won. But Marissa took a step forward, and suddenly she wasn't a victim anymore. "What you didn't mention, Clara, is that homelessness doesn't erase who you are. It doesn't take away your education, your experiences, or your ability to contribute to a conversation about literature, cooking, or childhood development." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "You also didn't mention that I've spent the last 8 months volunteering at a soup kitchen during the day, using my teaching skills to help other homeless individuals learn to read and write. That I've been working with a nonprofit to develop programs for homeless children who are falling behind in school." The room was dead quiet now, hanging on every word. "You see, I may not have a house right now, but I have something that money can't buy. I have dignity. I have compassion. And I have the ability to see people for who they really are, not just what they can do for me." Marissa's eyes swept the room, meeting the gaze of every person there. "I know what it's like to have nothing, to be invisible, to have people look through you like you don't exist. But I also know what it's like to find kindness in unexpected places, to discover that your worth isn't measured by your bank account or your zip code." She turned back to Clara, whose face had gone pale. "So, thank you for giving me the opportunity to remind everyone here what real class looks like. It's not about the designer dress or the country club membership. It's about how you treat people when they can't do anything for you in return." The room erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory clapping, but genuine, thunderous applause that seemed to go on forever. But Marissa wasn't finished. "And Clara, I hope someday you find what you're really looking for. Because this," she gestured the opulent reception hall, "isn't going to fill whatever's missing inside you." That's when Daniel stepped forward. He'd been planning to defend Marissa, to tear Clara apart for her cruelty. But watching Marissa handle herself with such incredible grace, he realized she didn't need defending. She needed supporting. "You want to talk about honesty, Clara?" Daniel's voice cut through the applause. "Let's be honest." Clara's face went from pale to ashen. "Let's talk about how you stayed with me when times were good, but the moment things got difficult, you ran straight to someone with more money." Daniel's voice was calm but deadly. Let's talk about how you're so insecure about your own choices that you had to try to humiliate someone who has more character in her little finger than you have in your entire body. The guests were watching like spectators at a tennis match, their heads turning between Daniel and Clara. And let's talk about what real love looks like, Daniel continued. It's not abandoning someone when they're down. It's not choosing a bank account over a person. It's standing by someone when they're at their worst, not just when they can buy you pretty things. He moved to stand beside Marissa, taking her hand. Marissa may not have a house right now, but she has something you'll never have, Clara. She has integrity. And that's worth more than all the money in the world. Clara stood frozen at the head table, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face. Her perfect wedding had become a disaster, and everyone in the room could see exactly who she really was underneath all the designer clothes and fake smiles. Her new husband looked mortified. Her parents seemed ready to disappear into floor, and the guests were staring at her like she was a stranger they'd never seen before. "I think we should go," Marissa said quietly to Daniel. But as they turned to leave, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson stood up from her table. "Marissa, dear," she called out, "I run a foundation that helps people get back on their feet after medical hardships. I'd very much like to talk to you about a position we have opening up. If you're interested." Then the bank president stood. "My wife runs a literacy program that could use someone with your background." One by one, other guests began approaching them, not with pity, but with respect, with job offers, with genuine interest in helping someone who had shown such incredible strength in the face of adversity. Clara watched from the head table as her attempt to destroy Marissa backfired spectacularly. Instead of humiliating her rival, she'd exposed her own ugliness and given Marissa exactly what she needed most: hope. As Daniel and Marissa walked toward the exit, Daniel realized something that hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't about getting back at Clara or proving a point. This was about finding something real, something that mattered, something worth fighting for. Would you have revealed Marissa's past to shut Clara down, or kept it private to protect her? Because what happened next would change everything, and Daniel was about to make a decision that would surprise everyone, including himself. They drove in silence the first 10 minutes, the weight of what had just happened settling between them like fog. Daniel glanced at Marissa in the passenger seat, watching the city lights play across her face as they left the country club behind. She'd been magnificent back there, absolutely fearless. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. Marissa turned to look at him, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I should be asking you that question. I just turned your revenge plot into a public therapy session." Daniel laughed despite everything. "Best revenge I never planned." "You know what's funny?" Marissa said, settling back into the leather seat. "For 8 months, I've been invisible. People look right through homeless people like we don't exist. Tonight, for the first time in almost a year, I felt seen. You were incredible in there. The way you handled Clara, the way you spoke to everyone." Daniel shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it." "I had nothing left to lose," Marissa said simply. "When you've already lost everything, there's a strange kind of freedom in that. You can finally be completely honest about who you are." They pulled into an all-night diner, the same one where they'd first talked just a week ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. Over coffee and pie, Daniel found himself really looking at Marissa for the first time. Not as a prop in his revenge scheme, not as someone he was helping, but as a person. A remarkable person who had faced more adversity than most people could imagine and still managed to maintain her dignity, her intelligence, her capacity for kindness. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "For what?" "For using you, for putting you in that situation without really thinking about what it might cost you." Daniel stirred his coffee absently. "I was so focused on getting back at Clara that I didn't consider how exposing your situation might affect you." Marissa was quiet for a moment. "You know what's strange? I'm grateful it happened." Daniel looked up, surprised. "Tonight, I remembered who I am," she continued. "Not homeless Marissa, not sick Marissa, not abandoned Marissa. Just Marissa, the teacher who loves literature and believes in second chances. The woman who knows her own worth regardless of her bank account." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You gave me a gift tonight, Daniel. You reminded me that I still have value." "You always had value," Daniel said fiercely. "That was never in question. Maybe not to you, but I'd forgotten." Marissa's eyes glistened. "When you lose everything, it's easy to start believing you're nothing. Tonight, I remembered that's not true. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. All this time, he thought he was helping her, but she'd been saving him right back. Clara did me a favor, too, he admitted. Leaving me, if she hadn't, I never would have met you. Careful, Marissa said with a wry smile. That sounds dangerously close to believing in fate. Maybe I do. They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Marissa spoke. Daniel, I need you to know something. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I don't want to be your charity project. Daniel started to protest, but she held up a hand. I'm not saying that to be difficult. I'm saying it because I need to rebuild my life on my own terms. I need to know that whatever I become next, it's because I earned it. I understand, Daniel said, and he meant it. But does that mean I can't be part of your life while you're rebuilding? Marissa smiled. I was hoping you'd ask that. 3 months later, Daniel stood in the doorway of a small apartment, watching Marissa hang the last picture on the wall. It was a photo from her teaching days, her surrounded by smiling third graders. It's perfect, he said. The apartment was small but bright, filled with books and plants, and the kind of warmth that comes from being truly home. Marissa had gotten a job with Mrs. Henderson's foundation, helping other people navigate the complex systems that could either destroy or rebuild lives. She was good at it, better than good. I can't believe it's mine, she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. You earned it, Daniel reminded her, and she had, every single day, with determination and dignity and a kind of quiet strength that Daniel had come to admire more than any business success he'd ever achieved. They'd been taking things slowly, building something real, instead of rushing into something that felt good but might not last. Daniel had learned the difference between wanting to save someone and wanting to love them. Marissa had learned the difference between being grateful and being dependent. What they'd found was better than either of them had imagined. You know what I realized? Marissa said, settling onto her new couch. What's that? Clara was right about one thing. It is inspiring when someone reinvents themselves. She smiled. She just didn't realize she was talking about you, too. Daniel raised an eyebrow. How do you figure? The Daniel I met that first night was angry, bitter, focused on getting revenge. The Daniel sitting here now is someone who's learned what actually matters. She was right. Somewhere between that first conversation in the diner and this moment, Daniel had changed. He'd gone from chasing success to chasing meaning, from trying to prove his worth to understanding it was already there. So what do you think? Daniel asked, was it worth it? The whole crazy scheme. Marissa considered the question. Ask me in 50 years. Is that a challenge? It's a promise. As Daniel looked around Marissa's small, perfect apartment, he thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with betrayal and revenge, with hurt and anger and the desire to prove a point. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else entirely. It had become about finding someone who saw strength where others saw weakness, who valued character over cash, who understood that true worth isn't measured in dollars or degrees, but in how you treat people when you have nothing to gain. Clara had taught them both a valuable lesson, though probably not the one she'd intended. She'd shown them that real class isn't about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about who you choose to be when life tests you. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even at all. Sometimes it's building something beautiful with the person who helped you remember who you really are. What do you think was the most shocking part of the story? Daniel's bold move, Marissa's transformation, or Clara's downfall? Let me know in the comments below, because stories like this remind us that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can change everything.